Good morning and welcome to our podcast Learning Today. My name is Mackenzie, and today we will be discussing the issue of creating effective lessons from a learning and development lens, specifically for the Grade 2 math curriculum. We will be hearing from three experts who will each examine this issue from a different perspective. Within my panel, I have Jessica, Katie, and Melanie. Since we have limited time, let's get down to business. I have one question for each panelist on this issue, and then we will do a quick wrap up at the end. So let's get started. My first panelist is Melanie, and she will be talking about constructivism. Your question is, how can we create effective lesson plans that help students accomplish the learning goals and success criteria?
Thanks, Mackenzie. That's a great question. So in order to ensure that our students can accomplish their learning goals and success criteria, they should be actively involved in the creation process. This process allows students to reflect on what they're going to be learning and what will assist them most in order to be successful. This process will allow students to recognize concepts that they might not have previously been aware of, but will be scaffolded upon throughout the lesson. Taking into consideration a student's knowledge is essential when planning your lessons. Their knowledge and past experiences will influence their time in the classroom, as well as their ability to teach and learn from those around them. Educators can also scaffold on their learners' previous knowledge in order to teach new concepts. So group work is really an important component of constructivist theories, which allows students to scaffold on the knowledge of their peers. So now I'll just go over some examples throughout the classroom. So constructivist practices can be applied throughout many areas of the classroom, and like Vygotsky emphasizes, social interactions and cultural tools are going to have a large influence on learning and development. Group work, as well as inquiry and problem-based learning, are common ways to incorporate cooperative learning. An example surrounding constructivism being incorporated into the Grade 2 math class would be to include addition and subtraction word problems. Word problems can be used in a way which would allow students to collaborate in order to find answers together. These questions are beneficial in many different ways in order to come up with the solution, and many different students are going to come up with different answers and perspectives on how they're going to solve their problem. Students can use different objects, diagrams, and equations in order to show their thinking throughout this process.
Wow, thank you. I now see the importance of incorporating small group activities into the students' work. So our next theory is social cognitive theory, and we will hear from Jessica. Your question is, what role do the environment and social interactions play in your lesson planning?
Great question, Mackenzie. Thank you. So from a social cognitive perspective, the environment and social interaction should be deeply integrated into our lesson planning. As Albert Bandura suggests, and he is the father of social cognitive theory, students learn from modeling, imitation, and just through observation, but also from their social interactions and their interactions with the environment. So when we're creating lesson plans, it's really important to include social situations where students can interact and learn from one another and from their teacher through modeling and imitation. So, for example, let's look at the social emotional learning skills strand of the math curriculum, specifically expectation A1.3. So this is where students will learn to maintain positive motivation and perseverance while they try to solve math problems, in order for them to recognize that it's important to try multiple strategies to solve a problem and that there's multiple ways to solve a problem, and also learn that it's important to learn from our mistakes and that making mistakes is okay and vital to the learning process. And that learning process is extremely aided by having optimism and hope. So for a teacher who is creating a lesson plan to work on this specific expectation, it's very important that they plan and model motivation and perseverance to their students. They need to show students how to be optimistic and how to persevere. Also, in creating their lesson plan, it's important that the teacher plans to show their students multiple ways to problem solve and multiple ways to solve the math problem so that students can model that behavior and that skill from their teacher. The teacher also needs to show students that it's okay to make mistakes and plan for the fact that there's probably going to be a student in the class who gets really frustrated with the math problem and just wants to give up. So the teacher needs to show them that it's okay if we make mistakes, and that's actually how we learn, and also model how to persevere through that situation. Another thing that's really important to plan for in that lesson plan is to include social interactions, because students can also model and imitate their peers and learn from their peers. So for example, you could have them work and collaborate on a math problem together. So that way you could have students showing each other the different ways they can solve the problem, and also model and imitate perseverance to one another. Then with the environment, it's very important that we create a safe and welcoming environment for our students where they feel comfortable to take risks, and also have an environment where you have visuals up that show that perseverance is accepted and learning from your mistakes is accepted, so that students can interact with that environment, model it, imitate it, and then have those skills themselves.
That's great. I now see how modeling and visuals can really be effective and how important they are in the classroom. Our next theory is cognitive load, and we will be hearing from Katie. So your question is, what suggestions do you have for teachers?
That's a great question, Mackenzie. So just a brief rundown of what cognitive load theory is. There's three kinds: intrinsic, which is unavoidable; extraneous, which gets in the way; and germane, which is desirable. So as teachers, we want to reduce extraneous cognitive load so that working memory capacity can be used for intrinsic and germane load instead. The way in which we present our instructions in our lessons can reduce this undesirable cognitive load because the learners make sense of new material by referencing schema or mental models of pre-existing knowledge. So a lack of clarity in instruction can put too much emphasis on the working memory, resulting in more time spent problem solving the instructions as opposed to developing new schema. Therefore, it is recommended for teachers to ensure that all of their sources of information are integrated and build off of each other, as well as to eliminate any information that does not add to the learning process. So relating this to math, in grade 2 geometric reasoning, students learn about sorting and identifying two-dimensional shapes by comparing number of sides and side lengths. In order to address this curriculum expectation, we can use visuals in our lessons to describe these shapes. So for example, a rectangle is a visual and should be described using a visual medium. Certainly as teachers, we can describe a rectangle in a verbal medium, but it takes just a second and far less effort for a learner to see what the teacher is talking about when they are shown a rectangle and can see the number of sides and the length of sides. So in this case, we are promoting germane cognitive load because students are able to engage in deep processing of the information through organizing, integrating, and connecting to prior knowledge, which is required to generate understandings. Students are able to use their working memory to link new ideas with information in their long-term memory and build new complex schema to help learners move from novice to expert.
That's amazing. Thank you. Jessica, do you have anything to add to this?
Yes, for sure. So just as a future implication for teachers from a social cognitive perspective, it's super important that you're aware that your students are going to model your behavior. So as a teacher, it's really important to model appropriate behavior and skills throughout your teaching practice, and also ensure that you're providing social opportunities and social interaction to your students.
Thank you. And Melanie, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. I think that for future implications for teachers, it's really important to keep in mind the guidelines for cooperative learning. So be aware that group sizes are going to have an influence on your groups, and keep in mind your learning goals that you've created. And also, it's really important to understand your learners and to understand what they're going to be comfortable with, because they might not be comfortable with all the cooperative learning methods.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in and listening to our podcast. We hope you learned lots about how to create effective lessons from a learning and development lens for grade 2 math. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.